All right, well, thanks everyone. Thanks for having us. My name is Scott Russell. You've probably heard me talk at least a little bit before, but I'm the Deputy Director of Trusted CI. I am super excited to be joined on stage with the people who are going to be doing most of the talking, I'm hoping. I'll have them introduce themselves in just a second. But today, what I'm going to have this panel focus on really is the mid-scale experience in building, operating cybersecurity programs. So I think most people in this room know mid-scales are they're big investments for with the NSF, but they don't rise quite to level of the major facility, and so they have some kind of unique challenges that come with being in that maybe in-betweener size. So we're going to be talking through that in a little bit more detail. But the main thing I want to highlight here is, well, sorry, I should just say, I'm going to let some time at the end, like the last 15 minutes for Q&A. But if you have questions throughout as we're talking, just try and get my attention, raise your hand, and I'll send a mic over to you, and we can get that going as well. And so with all that me talking out of the way, let's start off with some intros. Could I ask each of you to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your facility, and then provide just like a flavor of the complexity that comes with having to deal with cybersecurity at a mid-scale? And I'll start with Joe.
Okay. Hi, I'm Joe Saul. I'm the Privacy and Security Officer at ICPSR, which stands for Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research. And we're sort of part of the University of Michigan, but sort of not. Talk to the top of it? Okay, they vary. My personal background is I have a law degree, I've got a CISSP, I have a couple privacy certifications on top of that. Straight out of law school, I was part of the HIPAA rollout at the University of Michigan, then hired into private industry and was CSO of a health data analytics company that variously went by the names MedStat, the healthcare business of Thomson Reuters, Truven Health Analytics, and then we got bought by IBM, which ultimately resulted in my leaving that company and winding up back at U of M. I was brought into ICPSR to build and formalize a privacy and security program there. We had some of it more ad hoc than it needed to be. What ICPSR does is we're the world's largest social science data archive. We have some 350,000 data sets. We were founded in 1962. We still have data from then. We're a mandated repository for researchers on some grants with some agencies, which means that they have to deposit their data sets with us. Other researchers choose to deposit data sets with us. And we also work with federal agencies on several different grants where we distribute data for them, and with social media companies like Meta. So we have a vast accumulation of data. Some of it is not very sensitive. Some of it you could go look at if you're curious about consumer sentiments or something like that. Whereas some of it is actually highly sensitive. I think the most sensitive data we have is data on prison assaults, which includes video interviews with people who are still in the system. So you can imagine how dangerous that is. We have 3 projects where we have authority to operate at the FISMA moderate level with different sponsors, and we're in the process of onboarding a 4th. We have a lot going on. At the same time, we're only sort of part of the University of Michigan. We get critical services from the university, but we're independently governed by a council which is elected by the 850 institutions that make up the consortium. If I might, I have a quick question. Am I the only one here who's protecting social science data? I am not. Excellent. I was just curious because I hadn't run into anybody else who was. So let me just hand off to my colleague here. I think that probably covers it.
Let's go to Dave.
Okay, great. So I'm Dave Balenson. I'm with the University of Southern California Information Sciences Institute, where I'm the interim director for the Networking and Cybersecurity Division. And then I am the Community Outreach Director and a member of the leadership team for the Sphere Mid-Scale Research Infrastructure. Sphere stands for Security and Privacy Heterogeneous Environment for Reproducible Experimentation. So basically, we are a brand new mid-scale. We just finished our first of 4 years of a construction project. It's a next generation test bed that's going to help facilitate reproducible experimentation in cybersecurity and privacy communities. It's based on something called DETER. The DETER testbed has been around for about 20 years. It's been funded by DHS Science and Technology Directorate, by the National Science Foundation, and by DARPA. And Sphere will be built on top of DETER. It'll basically extend it from just general purpose compute nodes to also include embedded compute nodes, programmable networking nodes, GPUs to support machine learning research, CPS nodes, and an entire IoT testbed at Northeastern University that's going to be interconnected through Fabric. In terms of our approach to cybersecurity, we have basic security protections, things like identity and access management, network segmentation, firewalls, virtualization, antivirus, vulnerability scans, and things like that. But as a research project, there's no real formal cybersecurity requirements or program. The university and the institute, for the most part, leave us alone, other than providing training and securing our laptops. And so we pretty much have to go at it on our own for cybersecurity. And I'll talk about that later when Scott asks additional questions.
My name is Ryan Walker. I'm a security engineer at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications. I also work on the Fabric mid-scale project. Fabric is, pardon me, I'll read it, adaptive programmable research infrastructure for computer science and science applications. And please bear with me, I was a little bit of a late addition. I don't have nearly so polished notes to describe the project, but I'd be happy to talk with anyone during a hallway conversation.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so I'm going to jump right into a topic that we've already heard people bring up several times in different contexts, which is basically resources are limited in cybersecurity, right? Everyone just kind of accepts that's one of the fundamental constraints. And especially for mid-scales, where you're dealing with smaller overall budgets in general, how do you go about determining how much is enough, right? How much should you actually dedicate to cybersecurity versus how much needs to go to all of the other things you need to work on? So can you talk a little bit about how you go about thinking about that? And we'll start with Joe.
Sure. I inherited a partial program, which is helpful when I came in 21. But the real driving force for us, ICPSR has always been conscious of the sensitivity of some of the data we hold. But with the addition of programs under FISMA Moderate, our North Star, if you will, has become NIST 800-53, because the FISMA Moderate data is the most regulated data in our possession. And having regulation as a driver for your level of cybersecurity program and your level of spending is a very powerful incentive, right? If we want to keep the grants, we have to maintain authority to operate. So that pretty much drives what we do. We do what we have to do to meet FISMA. And we do have other projects which don't necessarily require that level of protection. Hi, Michael. I don't know if you remember, but I was on that call with you. But for shared resources, they have to meet that. In other words, any resource that serves those projects as well as other activities that we do needs to meet the higher of the standards. And it looks like it may be fun disentangling that on some projects going forward. But that's basically what it is. And I've been, in a sense, fortunate, speaking as a security leader, that most of my career has been with regulated data. If you're dealing with HIPAA PHI and you're not capable of making an argument for the security resources you need, you're not going to stay in that role. Conversely, it's really helpful to have regulations that carry a sting if you don't meet them when you're making arguments for budget. So, you know, that's kind of where we're at. Now, some of the things that we have go above and beyond or parallel to NIST 800-53 moderate in terms of protection. We have data that's under FERPA. We have data that's under HIPAA. We have, as I said, data that can be very, very damaging to the individuals it's about. LGBTQ, et cetera, health, the prison assault data, that sort of thing. And we protect that accordingly. So really, we're driven by the requirements around the data and by our obligations to protect research subjects.
Yeah, Dave?
Okay, so you would think as a cybersecurity and privacy testbed that we would have this cybersecurity thing down, but honestly, there's probably a little bit of the cobbler's children, and we've got to step back and really think explicitly about how we want to do cybersecurity. The good news is we do have an explicit cybersecurity task built in. It's one among many tasks that we have. We have a pretty broad scope. We have a lot that we've promised to NSF. We certainly want to secure it. We do have extensive, background experience and knowledge, and so we apply that knowledge. As I mentioned, we have a lot of basic protections such as identity management, access management, the network segmentation, firewalls, antivirus, et cetera. But the fact is we don't have, or we have not had, a formal cybersecurity requirements or a program. And so that's exactly why we were very interested in the Trusted CI framework and why I spearheaded our participation in the ECHO cohort. You heard Sean talk a little bit about the framework and the cohort in his remarks earlier this week. And so we had the privilege and honor of participating in the ECHO cohort, and we're able to sort of step back and think about the 16 musts and start to formulate how we would do a more formal program. What was really cool about going through the cohort was we did a validated self-assessment. We developed a draft cybersecurity program strategic plan, and I can talk a little bit more about those later. But this is going to let us go beyond the basic protections and just we know what we're doing, into actually having something that's more formalized, more written down, and aligns with mission, talks, thinks about governance as well as resources, and of course the controls.
Ryan?
Well, honestly, we haven't found the enough part yet when talking about how much to spend on cybersecurity. We haven't found the ceiling function, but via our engagement with Trusted CI, we were able to reevaluate or evaluate our tool and see what needed to be done and leverage that to get at least enough, and oftentimes more than enough, to accomplish what was necessary.
Yeah, very honest answer. I'll just remind, if people have questions or comments as we're going through, just raise your hand and I'll try and send a mic over. But I want to tamp down a little bit more on this. Oh, we lost our backdrop. I'm sorry. Okay. On this question of money. So I mean, there's this fundamental problem of like, well, when you do need more, who pays and how do those conversations happen? And I think as we heard here, all three of you are in kind of different positions where you have different funders, you have different baselines, but can you talk about the practicalities of having those conversations, both with your funding agency and also with your leadership?
Sure. ICPSR is funded in a way that's kind of unusual. I'm saying that right, but I suspect out of this huge crowd of people, we're going to find that there are almost as many funding models as there are people sitting here today. Our primary funding is the contributions from the members of the consortium who pay to keep us operating, keep the archive operating. They get access to data sets that people outside the consortium can't necessarily get. So that's one source of funding. Another source of funding are our federal project sponsors, which include NSF on one project, maybe more, but also include a couple different branches of NIH, part of the Department of Justice, the Millennium, it's MCC, and it's Millennium something something, and forgive me, I don't have it today, but it's a federal agency that I hadn't heard of until I took the role, and other groups, right? So what I'm not saying in here is we don't get a tremendous amount of money from the University of Michigan directly. We do get services from the University of Michigan. So it's a complex environment. My own, well, we're not on TLP Amber with this program. A percentage of my time is billed to our various sponsored projects depending on what we provide for them. And that's true for my 3 staff members as well. And it, it's true for other units within our organization. So what this means is funding is a very complicated topic. We can ask the membership for more, but not a lot more in any given year. If a grant funder wants us to do something, like, for example, meet FSMA moderate, then that should be built into the grant funding, both for the tools that we need to do it, because on a FSMA moderate project, if you're buying, for example, a web-based tool, a cloud-based tool, then probably you have to buy the FedRAMP version rather than the normal people version, and that adds significant expense. I mentioned we get services from the university. We do. It's the University of Michigan. It has an excellent, large cybersecurity program, an information assurance unit that we work with a lot, IT support, but they don't support FSMA directly by default. So there are cases where they say, here, have our tool, and we say, yeah, not in our environment, and we have to pay extra for the FedRAMP version, right? So there are a multitude of things that they can't provide to us because our needs are outside the normal bounds, and there are a multitude of things that they do provide for us. How we go about getting more funding, usually it involves talking to the people who hold the grant, who negotiate the grants. Often that involves saying, hey, look, you folks didn't build adequate cybersecurity into this. How are we going to address that? And with my arrival and with the ramp up of some of our compliance activities, it's becoming more of a thing. But if you're, in year 2 of a 5-year grant, you discover you're short on cybersecurity funding to staff positions, it's awkward, right? So for us, it's sort of a constant thing.
Yeah, Dave.
Okay, so funding is a real challenge for us. As I mentioned, well, I guess we're all mid-scales. Mid-scales are capped at 20 million. We got 18 million total. That's over 4 years. 1 million of that is contingency. We do not have an extensive team. I would say we have roughly 5 or 6 FTEs striped over maybe 12 to 15 people. Of those, a very small number of them are explicitly assigned to the cybersecurity tasks that I mentioned earlier. We don't necessarily get a lot of help from the university and the institute, as I mentioned. They pretty much provide basics and leave us alone. We're fairly independent. That said, the university is going through the process of CMMC and applying that across all of the various programs. And so I do expect at some point that'll get pushed down, and we'll get some help from them and work more closely with them on that. On the other hand, as I mentioned, we realize that we need to do better. we have to have a more formal cybersecurity program. That's why we participated in the Trusted CI framework and the cohort. And the one thing that's become clear from that is that we can't do it all ourselves. We need help. So we're going to have to go to the Institute and figure out what we can leverage from the Institute. We're going to have to go to the university, figure out what we can leverage from the university. And then ultimately, we're still a construction project. We do have some contingency funding. We could potentially tap into that in order to increase our work on some of these other elements beyond just the technical controls. And then when we start to figure out our operations plan and how we're going to sustain and operate over time, we'll be all the more knowledgeable for putting appropriate cybersecurity budget into the overall operational budget. Those are the plans, at least at this point. Having the framework gives us a better perspective on how to make the argument in the case to go to the Institute, the university, and to NSF, and try to get more resources moving forward for both construction and operation.
Yeah.
I am luckily pretty removed from the funding question on the Fabric project. However, cybersecurity wasn't initially designed in. Security was, but the cybersecurity program was not. And in order to ensure that we get the funding to do what we need to do, I've found it's very useful to explain and show what utility that having a good cybersecurity program will have to the science and to the results of the science. Especially with a project that is run mostly by researchers, I think that has been a very effective way to communicate the importance of cybersecurity and get the funding we need, especially when we can show that we can extend the science or the kinds of science that can be done by securing the experiment.
Yeah, we had a question.
Actually, I just wanted to add a little on the fundings. So with the help of the Trusted CI folks, if you can elevate your IT staff to a CISO level or somebody that can look at the budgets, then it's then you can work with the CFO and said, you know what, these other budget allocation, we need some of those to help with the cybersecurity part of it as part, and it's, maybe some of the recommendation is from the Trusted CIs, and then some of the other recommendation is we have to do it to comply with the NSF stuff. So if your IT department is high enough that you can actually see the budget, then you can actually manipulate the budget a little.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to move on, although I'm looking at Jim down here. I want to make sure that I thought we had until 10:45. Okay. I was like, man, 5 minutes left. This is
The
going way
clock
faster
thinks
than I
we're a
thought.
30-minute.
I thought I was going to be out of this easy.
No, we got you up here all day. All right, so we heard a couple of comments that actually dovetail really nicely into my next kind of conversational area, which is about thinking about your stakeholders. And we use stakeholders pretty broadly when we talk about it. So this is both funding agencies, but also like parent organizations, partner institutions. And with mid-scales, I mean, maybe this is true across the board, but I feel like with a lot of the mid-scales we've been engaging with, they have really complex stakeholder environments where they're either they're virtual organizations, they've got a lot of partners, they're distributed all over the place. So how do you go about navigating those relationships with like your parent organizations, your partner organizations? To what extent do you kind of view them as a resource to be pulled from? To what extent do you view them maybe as like a source of unwanted obligations to keep more at arm's length? Can you talk about that?
We're not under TLP yellow, so I won't get as colorful as I otherwise might. Broadly, I mean, the people we have relationships with are the University of Michigan, the Institute for Social Research within the University of Michigan that we're part of, and our sponsors. And broadly, we have good relationships. The university doesn't demand a lot of us. We do pay a percentage of the revenue that we bring in to ISR and to the university's general fund. And that's not something I'm prepared to talk about. But it may be true for other mid-scales with universities that have what everybody sort of colloquially calls a provost tax on big research projects. I don't know how many of the people here interact with that. I guess I should also say that I'm not in the technology organization. I have a team of 4 of us who are explicitly the Privacy and Security Office for ICPSR. I realize that makes me lucky that we're allowed to operate a dedicated unit. We also work extensively with technical resources in our technology organization, and we have some very good people. So from the university, we receive services, we receive backup. Information assurance runs assessments on us. We welcome assessments, unlike some parts of the university. They assess us at FSMA moderate. Our previous assessment was Rev 4. We're currently involved in the migration to Rev 5. Side note, if you've been putting that off, don't. It's a moderately heavy lift. Our interactions with our sponsors range from relatively easy and low friction to extremely demanding, mercurial, ever-changing, and problematic. I want to be clear that NSF is not in that second bucket, okay? I'm not going to name who is. I'm thinking of someone. And that's actually a point I want to make is, if you've seen one relationship with a federal sponsor, you've seen one. So you can get blindsided by some people being a lot more challenging than others, even if they want to apply the same standard. And that's worth thinking about. Our relationship with our consortium, the 850-ish universities around the globe, and the 20 representatives that they somehow pick who show up in Ann Arbor twice a year, including last week, is actually excellent. Part of this is we have a director who's a very skilled politician as well as being a very skilled researcher who can help manage these relationships. From a cybersecurity point of view, as I said, I've been fortunate that our need has been made very, very clear by the standards that we have to adhere to keep that funding. And if you have a driver like that, then clear communication is what matters. Communicate early and often. Make sure, as I said, that those costs are built into the grants, which we have not always been successful at doing in the past. And that has a lasting effect, especially if it's an extended grant. So if there are standards, clear communication is the key. If there aren't standards, then you're going to have to put in more effort to make a case. And people you can work with to help you advocate for that include the university's cybersecurity organizations and risk management, but also can include, if you have good channels to them, and I do, I know some of them, and I have a JD myself, can include your institution's general counsel's office. Because if other people are denying that a risk exists, they do risk day in, day out. They pay attention. So it's worth talking with them about it. I'm also going to echo what David said. If you don't have other standards that you already are having to work from, and maybe even if you do, because I did it, the Trusted CI cohort program is an excellent way to get a handle on where you're at relative to anybody else, and come out of it with documentation that you can show folks in technology, in your leadership, in legal, that you have gaps. that you need to move up on, and that will help you also make a case for support and funding.
Yeah, your check's in the mail, by the way, for the
Yeah.
plug there. Thank you. Dave.
All right, so I think you had asked about stakeholders,
Yeah.
working with stakeholders. So this is actually one of the areas that the Trusted CI framework helped us immensely, because one of the musts is specifically to, you must identify and account for cybersecurity stakeholders and obligations. And it forced us to step back and think about that. And as we did that, we did so fairly broadly. And we realized it's not just the institute that we're a part of, it's not just the university, it's not just our sponsor, the National Science Foundation, it's not just our users, all of the researchers who are going to conduct experimentation on the test bed, but it also includes our subcontractor, Northeastern, who I mentioned has an IoT lab that they're going to be integrating along with all the other hardware and software. It also includes colo facilities. We don't actually run everything in Marina Del Rey, California, in the ISI building. We have things off-site at a place called Equinix. We also have things colo at the university. And it also prompted us to realize that we rely on a lot of other third-party entities. A lot of the software development tools, a lot of the other tools, even the cybersecurity tools themselves, come from third parties. And so we have to sort of think about and extend the cybersecurity program, if you will, to all of those different entities. And that was one of the eye-opening things that we learned about from applying the framework. In terms of the university and the institute, I mentioned that we have a somewhat arm's length relationship with them because we're used to doing just more pure research projects. This, as I mentioned, is a construction project. It's not a research project. It's meant to support research, but it's not research itself. And so we have to take a different tact. And the good news is the relationship between our team and the Institute and the university is evolving and it is changing, and I think for the better. As I mentioned, they are in the process of adopting CMMC, and it also turns out that for the Institute, we call it CIS. I don't even know what that stands for, but the information security team, we're doing some consolidation of, post-COVID, we have people spread out all over the building. Not everybody's coming in anymore, hybrid work arrangements, so people are spread out. So we're consolidating, and it just so happens we're putting the IT and the security team on the same floor with our team. And so I'm actually looking forward to that because we're going to get to interact with them a lot more. It also turns out my boss, Terry Benzel, is a associate director for the Institute and is actually now running the IT team. And so she sort of has a purview across both those teams. This is kind of unique to the Institute and where we're at right now, and not something you're going to necessarily find in all organizations, but it's something that we can leverage. And then I guess from a stakeholder perspective, that's pretty much all I want to say.
Well, Fabric is exceptional in that it has very, very many stakeholders, a lot of partners, and direct stakeholders to the cybersecurity program is also a little bit complex because we are a center that's underneath the University of Illinois, which is paid out as a sub-award for the Fabric contract, which is at Renzi and Kentucky. And so there are very many steps there. And then, of course, there are all the partners where we have sites across the U.S. and the world. Really, all I can add is, communication is key, frequent communication. Sorry.
So that actually makes me realize another point. I mentioned, so we are actually stakeholders to each other.
Indeed, yeah.
Right? Because I mentioned that we're using Fabric to connect the Northeastern IoT lab to the main infrastructure in California. And so in effect, we rely on you, on Fabric, for that interconnect, and hence the security that you provide. And that now we're a stakeholder to you, in that you may have certain obligations you want to push to us, or certain obligations that you have to make for us. So,
Well, and hopefully we can help one another to move our projects forward as well. So not just rely on one another, but help one another.
Yeah, I want to follow up, Ryan, with what you said just a little bit. And I'll note when I chatted with Ryan about this, he did say he's a walker more than a talker, but we're going to make him a talker a little bit too. You mentioned just the sheer number of stakeholders Fabric has to deal with. Can you talk a little bit about, was that just like understood? Were there, what challenges kind of came with trying to keep track of all of them? How do you talk to that many people?
I'll let you know when I figure it out. Is that an adequate answer? It is difficult. It has its challenges, and I think we're all probably familiar with how interinstitutional moves happen frequently, and trying to track, our various points of contact at our different stakeholders proves to be very challenging. We actually spend a lot of people time trying to track that and trying to track things down.
We got a question in the audience.
Thanks. I was kind of curious, with all of these stakeholders, how has that informed your incident response and notification plans?
I had just mentioned that we spent a lot of time trying to maintain communications, and I think that's the most important thing. Luckily, we haven't had to exercise too strongly our incident response, but we do try to keep those lines of communication open, so that when things happen, we can get a quick response. We also spend a reasonable amount of effort making sure we have multiple channels of communication to the different stakeholders for when issues may arise, so we can get a hold of people and begin an action if we need to.
Great. All right, we've got a little bit of time left, but I do want to make sure we leave a good chunk of time for audience Q&A. So I want to throw what will sound like a final question. It's not actually a final question, so don't get too comfortable. But we've got a lot of experience dealing with cybersecurity from different kinds of facilities up here. If you were to be talking to a new mid-scale who has to deal with this for the first time, what would be a recommendation or some recommendations you would give to them as they're starting to tackle building a cybersecurity program?
Okay, so I'm gonna take you at your word. Someone is now operating a mid-scale.
Or they're
Maybe
about to.
maybe it's existed for a while, but they now have
Yes.
to start worrying about this kind of thing. Because it depends on where you're starting from. So if we're saying at the most basic level, you're parachuted in, suddenly you need to worry about having a cybersecurity program for your organization when maybe it was purely ad hoc before. Maybe it wasn't a priority before. Starting today, it has to be. The first thing I'm going to say, and it might be slightly controversial, but I do come from healthcare, is stop the bleeding. If there are any identified critical exposures, areas where you know you have a severe ongoing problem, you've got stuff on servers that's not protected, stop the bleeding. Move on that first, simply because it's obvious why, right? But what you should do beyond that is this: get a handle on your environment. Understand what you're protecting, understand what your borders are, understand what the major risks you're facing are, and start getting advice on the gaps. But if you don't know what you have, you can't build a program to protect it. So day one, get in, start doing that, risk assessment, at least a basic one. Do you have specific regulatory requirements? Has there been an effort to meet them? If so, great. It may still be ad hoc on the terms that Scott's talking about. It may not be where you need to be. But you need to know what regulations apply to the data you have, what unusual or specific threats are out there. You need to set up a basic incident response. A formal incident response is something you do need. But at its most basic level, you have to understand how you tell people who might notice an incident to report it, who takes the reports, how you process those, how you triage them out, who's going to respond. You need to get the basics down on that. And then you can work on building the program, right? If you don't have those basic things, an understanding of what you have, an understanding of the basic threats, your basic gaps, your wounds, how you're going to respond to incidents, if you don't have that, you could get caught flat-footed very early in your tenure. Beyond that, get your leadership on board. If you have a parent institution, work with them, leverage the resources they have. Again, it's helpful to understand what you have first so that you can come in and talk to them about what you need to protect. I mean, we have environments here that range from a traditional academic environment where some folks in some offices with a few servers are doing something unusual, to the people who have a fleet of ships, right? The different environments and the divergence from what the institution is prepared to help you with varies. I think the Trusted CI Framework Cohort Program is a good way to do this, a good way to initially get your hands around it. But if you're in a panic on the ground situation, reach out to Trusted CI and just work with them on an evaluation. What I just said doesn't necessarily apply as step one if you're suddenly finding yourself protecting CUI or FISMA obligations. At those points, they're still helpful. And we undertook that assessment despite being experienced with FISMA for a variety of reasons, and it was valuable. But I think they're a good start, and I'm not just saying that because Scott's going to send me a check later. One final comment on this, because it can really blindside people. If you initially look at this and say, my God, we need to hire somebody onto our group with cybersecurity experience, get started on that as soon as you can get the funding and the position. Because in our experience, it's a nightmare. When I hired in at ICPSR, I said, I need to build a team. They said, okay, you've got an open requisition for a security analyst. I stole somebody from our technology group to fill that requisition because he had significant experience with the environment. I didn't. I was new. He had significant experience with providing supporting documentation for FISMA. I did, but it's not my full-time job, right? So I took him from the technology organization. We cut a deal. I said, you can have my security analyst requisition. I want you to have another technical member of staff to support this. They stole my guy's office, which was irritating because office space was at a premium. He's not in technology anymore, right? We get it back. But the interesting thing is we started this process in late 21. I hired in August of 21. And it wasn't until, I want to say July of this year, of 24, that we got a security analyst who stuck around for more than 2 weeks. This is our third attempt. We're the University of Michigan. We pay well for a higher education institution in tech. We have a policy that allows these people to work fully remote. And this is still try 3. He's great. I hope he stays. But be aware that the hiring is going to take longer than you probably think it is. All right, I'll shut up. David.
Okay, trying to remember the question.
Advice for
Sorry.
for new mid-scales.
Yeah, so I know it's going to sound like I'm repeating myself here, but number one advice from a cybersecurity perspective for mid-scales is learn about and look at and leverage the Trusted CI framework. And so I also realize I may be preaching to the choir here. So I guess real quick, I want to do an audience poll. How many people here are part of a mid-scale research infrastructure that have used or are using the Trusted CI framework and have participated in one of the cohorts? I mean, this is basically the risk community, right? So that's it?
Well, you said
There-
mid-scale. We don't have that many mid-scales
Oh,
here.
okay, okay, all right. Any infrastructure that's using it? Okay, shoo. Right? How many have
Wow.
not? Is there anyone here who has not done it yet?
Shame.
Right? So
It's worth
actually,
it.
yeah.
It's
So
worth it.
so I guess in a sense I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, because I'm not telling you anything that hopefully you haven't already learned. I mean, honestly, I wish I had known about the framework when we were writing our mid-scale proposal. Part of the proposal, as we all know, is you have to do the program execution plan, the PEP, and there's a cybersecurity plan section within that. And frankly, we were focused on the key elements of the infrastructure, and we wrote maybe half a page on cybersecurity and said we'll do more later, after award. We didn't want to spend an inordinate amount of time up front. Had I known about the framework, I would have at least used the 16 musts as a guide to hit and give a sense of how we would approach those various elements. I also would have used it as a means to put more of those elements into the different tasks within the work breakdown structure, and then those would have gotten budgeted, and we would have had more budget up front. I mean, we have some, but not as much as I would have liked. The good news is we did get awarded, despite a fairly modest cybersecurity plan in the PEP, and a promise that we would do better after award. And so immediately after award, I don't know what it was. I guess I came to this last year. I got exposed to the plan, the framework. I started talking to Scott and others, and somehow I got invited to be an ECHO cohort. I was really pleased that I was. Some of the rest of the Sphere team were a little nervous about having me do it. They said it's too soon, we don't have the time, we didn't really budget for you, you're supposed to be our community outreach director, you're not supposed to be spearheading our cybersecurity program. But I said, no, we have got to do this. We didn't know about it, we didn't do it as part of the proposal, we've got to do it now. And the sooner we do it, the better. And I have to say, I'm so glad we did do it, because this validated self-assessment, I mean, just doing the self-assessment, it's a humbling exercise. You've got to be brutally honest. You can't, pull the wool over these guys' eyes. They're experienced, they've been around, they've done this before, and they want to see evidence, and they're pretty reasonable about it too, right? If there is, evidence, or you at least describe some semblance of order, some kind of a plan. It doesn't have to be fully formalized. You get credit for that. But it was nice going through and understanding where we were doing well, where we weren't doing so well, and where we needed to improve, and then putting that into an actual strategic plan that I can now use to go to the Institute, to go to the university, to go to NSF, go to my own team and say, here's where we need to do more in order to have this, because we're going to need this in the end. Once this thing is built, I don't want to be parachuting in and, scrambling like Joe was. I want to have this, built in, especially given that we're a cybersecurity and privacy test bed, and I don't want to be the cobbler's children.
Forgive me for just a sec, I should clarify. When I came into ICPSR, it was not a parachuting into a disaster situation. Yeah. They'd had the ATOs for a few years. We were operating well, but more ad hoc than we needed to be, for example.
All right, well, I'll just say, Dave, your check is in the mail. Thank you. They're very kind words.
I was about to say, and I too do not expect to get a check in the mail.
Ryan, sorry.
No, that's okay. Yeah, there's not a lot for me to add there. I 100% agree with you. But until there are more stringent requirements from the NSF for these mid-scale awards to include cybersecurity, the only thing I have to add is when you're brought in, because very likely you'll be brought in late and you'll be told, hey, we have these cybersecurity needs. Take a step back and critically evaluate what those needs might actually be, because the PIs, the researchers who say they have certain cybersecurity needs, are definitely looking at it from a perspective that is not grounded in cybersecurity. Don't just hit the ground running with what they say. Here's what we need. Probably they need something else as well, and it might be more important, and probably they need everything. And do leverage the Trusted CI framework when you're looking at that to help identify those needs. My check will be smaller, but I'll send you my address. Yeah.
But I think you made a great point there, that as a cybersecurity professional, you can't necessarily trust the assertions of academic leadership, and certainly not research primary investigators as to what they actually need to protect what they're doing. Can I say something a little bit snarky, real quick? Research, like medicine and like law, is an area where you can wind up in a senior management position because you are excellent at something that's completely unrelated to management. And it's worth keeping that in mind. I've been very fortunate where I am, but you all know what I'm talking about, and you've all met the people I'm talking about. As a cybersecurity professional, Ryan's point is right on. You can't trust their assertions about cybersecurity. They didn't get where they are by being good at it in most cases.
Yeah. Let's open up to audience questions. We got about 7 or 8 minutes left, and I see Phil over here.
I kind of wanted to follow up on that last responder on the right here's comment about where you're kind of going from, because I think one of the things that I find is when you're talking to the people that don't know what they need to do, and they're talking cybersecurity, I think as the cybersecurity professional, it's important for us to listen to about what they're actually doing, because what they're actually doing can actually be addressing some of the controls and they just don't know it. And we shouldn't feel like we need to come in and change things to align with our expectation, but say, oh, you're doing a great job there. Let's just show up this little bit more to get you over the hump to where you need to be, that to call it, it meets this control thing, because what I've found in a lot of institutions is they're doing a lot of environments that I've come into, but it's just not so organized and doesn't have a label on it. So that was just something to just be aware of when we're talking with these things. We don't need to come reinvent the wheel all the time. We need to listen to them. And I think that's been said already. But, we can help them get to that last end stage.
That's a good clarification. And this is why I like the idea of the framework and implementing the framework. Is it's kind of like having a, cybersecurity colored glasses, right? Where you're not going and implementing a structure for things, but you're interpreting what's being done in a certain way, in a secure way in this case, right? And we are lucky now compared to, I think, 10, 20 years ago, more people understand that security and cybersecurity and secure infrastructure is important and necessary, but they might not have the language or all the tools to do it and apply it. And that's where we come in and we really help support them in what they're doing and make sure it aligns with the actual cybersecurity needs so that they can accomplish the science.
Yeah. I also just want to say, love the idea of cybersecurity colored glasses. I think we should add that to our swag.
Have those as a giveaway next year's summit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll add in just, we heard Mike talk earlier this morning about you should have use a framework and identify, a control set. And going in at the beginning, we didn't have either. We now have the framework, the cybersecurity colored glasses, and it's helping us immensely. I wasn't sure what was the best framework. I had heard about the Trusted CI framework. It was designed, sort of purpose-built for, research education environments. Wasn't so sure, but until I actually looked at it and learned about it, and that I really see and realize that it does align very well with these types of environments. And so it's one of the reasons why I push it really hard. And I'm really nervous also in front of Mike saying a lot of these things because I'm worried about what we're going to see in future solicitations and requirements. But honestly, I don't think it would hurt for NSF to push, given the nature of the environment we're in now and the need to have all these things in there, some kind of incentive, motivation, pushing people to make sure they think about it more up front and then just don't leave it to happenstance and trying to catch up later.
Yeah.
Scared to say that so blatantly, but I agree. And I was trying to imply that earlier. I think it's very important to have upfront as a requirement.
Am I hot? I'm thinking the mic is hot, but not
Your
me,
mic is
right?
hot.
Just making sure.
No further.
Well, actually, so I've been in IT a long time, and the thing with the IT departments is we're not good at documentations, right? So actually with Mike's slides and with the trusted CIs, and we realize we got to do all the documentation. A lot of stuff is implemented. A lot of stuff has been put in place, but we didn't document it. We was like, okay, this is done. This is done. We just didn't document all the process and put all the stuff and put it into a desk manual for people to read.
Just add a couple of things. Do you think you're going to see cybersecurity called out more in solicitations? I know I have a working group internally looking at language for things like that. We're not going to come out and say you must do this standard. And it goes back to we got to buy the paint if we're telling you what color to use, right? And that's a really tricky problem, way above my pay grade. But what Sam's point about documentation, I've been a failure at this most of my career. Like I think most cybersecurity professionals, you're just too busy to get around to a lot of it until you get audited, and then you put it together. But one tiny example, in the last time I wrote a IAMP, we got to the point where we're covering what's our scope, which sounds very easy, and maybe for a facility it is. Here's an IP range. But at a large institution, just defining your IP range that you're actually responsible for is super tricky because you've given away parts of it, you've sold parts of it, you've rented parts of it. And just going through that exercise of taking it from tribal knowledge that the network team has to a paragraph in my management document was hugely effective. So amen to raising the bar on that.
Great. We have time for probably maybe one more question.
You have 45 seconds.
All right. Well, how about everyone join me in giving a round of applause to our panelists? A really great discussion.